Hello, everyone. This is Cody Lee of BlackCatBooks.org, author of I, the Dragon, Cruel and Beautiful Rabbit Hole, Lore and Frame, the upcoming Jaw of the Dragon. One of the weird things I've noticed over the past 4 years is the decline in interest in PlayStation exclusives. I think following the release of the PS5 and The Last of Us Part 2, a lot of the really astroturfed, a lot of the really fake hype regarding around PlayStation exclusives about how all of it was like controlled by game journalists and how the games weren't in any way notable or memorable or fun, and how like several other games do the exact same thing that PlayStation games do better, like how Devil May Cry is a better God of War, how Tomb Raider is a better Uncharted, like the list goes on and on. How they're better like superhero games compared to Spider-Man, like. Traditionally, when I first got into PlayStation, like my feeling on it was that the games were all right, but Nintendo did it better, right? That's always been my stance on it. That's always been my feeling. But like, as I've gotten older and the games have gotten worse, I saw how the hype for these games kept growing and escalating and getting more and more of like promotions and people were ecstatic about minor releases. But after the PS5 release, we've been seeing gradually that has been dying down. Like that has been going way downhill. Like with the release of it's hard to believe that just a few years ago we were talking about like how Horizon Zero Dawn, Horizon Mini Yawns, as I called it, like came out and supposedly competed with Breath of the Wild, selling like 20 million units when nobody played or cared about it at all, right? Like compared to the most hype-worthy Nintendo Switch game of all time, like The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. It was weird seeing like this irrelevant PlayStation exclusive go up against stuff like that, and getting blown the fuck out by essentially every other game that came out this year, including Nier Automata, including Persona 5, and including, yes, The Legend of Zelda: Breath of the Wild. So that and games like God of War, and I suppose like Spider-Man PS4, like they got like all of this weird hype and attention really for no reason. Like I've talked about all of this at length several times on this channel, but what's happened since then is that after the release of The Last of Us Part 2, it feels like PlayStation just isn't able to like keep people's interest anymore. Like after The Last of Us Part 2, people started to see through the facade. And as a result of that, when Sony pulled stunts like releasing a DLC campaign, Spider-Man Miles Morales, as a full price release, people called them out on it. People called them out on the fact the game was like 5 hours long, that there was nothing really to it. It was like the same setting and the same setting as the original, and they didn't do anything new or interesting or compelling, and that like it really just should have been a basic DLC expansion for the original game as opposed to like a full price release, right? It was too expensive for what it was, and nobody really supported or enjoyed it. People like fell off the Spider-Man PS4 train after the game came out anyway, but like Miles Morales was a big nail in the coffin for a lot of reasons. I myself was not aware that Marvel Studios was trying to pretend that this unrelated character, Miles Morales, was like a was the new Spider-Man, and that's kind of gone down this rabbit hole where like people accuse you of being racist because because uh because the character is not Peter Parker, right? Like never will be. Like I don't understand what's so difficult to understand about this is that like Spider-Man's secret identity has been Peter Parker. Everyone knows that, and like trying to pretend this other character is Spider-Man, like it just rubs me the wrong way. Like I imagine like people had the same thoughts when like Ben Riley was introduced and why the Clone Saga was so despised because like the creators really wanted you to think that maybe there was a possibility that the Peter Parker was a clone and that like the real Spider-Man was another guy. That's just no, that doesn't fly with anyone. It's just never gonna work. That's not how comics continuity works. There are certain things you just cannot change, and like the secret identity of the characters is one of them. Like there's just no Miles Morales will never be Spider-Man. So, um, and like after that, after the DLC campaign of Spider-Man, like bombing as it did, becoming nowhere near as relevant as the original, we've kind of seen this pattern where all these sequels to these PlayStation exclusives, from Horizon Forgotten West to God of Soy, Ragnarok, like all of them feel like rehashed, reutilized, just the same thing again with like more quippy Marvel tier dialogue with like reused animations and just they don't feel like proper sequels. They feel like DLC campaigns. They feel like Miles Morales. They feel like cheap knockoffs of what's come before. And I think gamers have kind of spent enough time with these games to suddenly realize that yeah, there is a problem with this. You know, there isn't enough content, there isn't enough complex gameplay, there isn't enough to keep me interested. So I'm not going to go out and play Ragnarok. And I feel this is actually basically the modern equivalent of where I was 10 years ago, right? Where I was realizing that like none of these PlayStation exclusives were good and that they weren't worth supporting. And I gradually just moved away from them and eventually decided that it was my best interest to not own a PS4 because nothing they released was good. You know, and I went ahead and got an Xbox instead, and I also regretted that because that was almost as bad, to be honest with you. I I have issues with PlayStation, and I think more and more people are starting to feel the same way. I don't think there's any real recovery for them. I think people are straight up just not buying PlayStation 5s because first of all, they don't have time, and second of all, like the games aren't good. Like they don't want to spend the time to go through God of War Ragnarok and realize that like, oh, the game is not that good. You know, they don't want to have that experience. Like the hype cycle for PlayStation has imploded upon itself. Like an essential aspect of it, the game journalism industry has essentially collapsed. And there's nothing really to replace it. Like YouTubers aren't doing a good enough job. People aren't people just have kind of plugged themselves out of the matrix when it comes to this very specific topic. Like there is no rebuilding what PlayStation has lost here. They're no longer they're no longer the hot new commodity when it comes to the gaming sphere, like saving us all from the evil Nintendo. Like they are obviously more toxic than Nintendo ever was to anyone who knows anything about gaming. And more, I think people are beginning to migrate back to Nintendo platforms. Now, they shouldn't have left Nintendo to begin with, but the fact that it's happening at all shows how much faith PlayStation has lost among its audience of like people who just don't know anything about games. Even people who don't know anything about video games are turning on PlayStation, and that fundamentally always has been their core audience.